Our next subject is a very hot subject, sustainability and climate change. So we're going to go right into our session on Roundtable on sustainability and climate change, featuring the award-winning Saanich Climate Plan.
Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much, Gabby, for the introduction. I am thrilled to be hosting this panel. This is going to be the hottest topic on the forum agenda, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here. So I have been an elected official and I am a citizen, and I believe that sustainability and systems thinking have been baked into my blueprint. And I know that when I was an elected official, I wanted to leave a legacy that future generations would bless rather than curse. And I want to carry that role into, I want to carry that thinking into my role as a citizen. I stumbled on a new question yesterday as I was listening to a podcast, one that I've never heard articulated so well. And the question was, how can I be a good ancestor? And I wanted to take that question a step further and ask ourselves as we go into this panel discussion, how can we live and lead so that we don't have to apologize to future generations? I found out a couple of days ago that I'm going to be a grandmother to a new little baby girl. She's on her way. And one of the things that question got me thinking about was, what are her grandchildren going to be? What are they going to say about us? What are they going to say about our time on this earth? So that future thinking is so important. And really that's what this panel's all about. So I'm thrilled that you're here, and we're going to, I'm going to move us all to, from the philosophical and the ethereal into hearing, we're going to be hearing a little more about the tangible components and aspects and the strategic components, things you can do right now around sustainability and climate change. So we're going to be hearing from Rebecca Newlove, Manager of Sustainability for the Corporation of the District of Saanich, to talk about the award-winning District of Saanich 2020 Climate Plan. And we're going to be digging into that. But later on, with some of the panelists, we're going to really dig into some questions around what are some of the most important conversations that we need to be having as citizens, as elected officials. What are those important conversations that we need to be having that maybe we're not having? And how do we amplify those conversations? And what are the leadership attributes that are needed at every level, regardless of what your role is in the current environment? And then how do we embody the necessary actions? And it's really about closing the knowing-doing gap. How do we close what we know and make it into actions? And so we're going to start with Rebecca. She's going to tell us how Saanich is actually closing the knowing-doing gap. So welcome, Rebecca.
Hi,
so
Christina.
Thank you. I'm pleased that you're here. So Saanich has adopted a new climate plan in 2020 that has been recognized with a couple of awards. And so we're interested to hearing from you. Tell us about that. Tell us about that plan.
Absolutely. Well, the plan's built upon more than a decade of previous work at the District of Saanich and within the community. And it's really been accelerated by Council declaring a climate emergency in 2019. And we were well underway with an update to the climate plan at that stage, but that really accelerated the action needed and gave recognition to the importance of this planning work that was underway. So Council then adopted the plan in January of last year, January 2020. The plan has several targets in it. So it has a 50% reduction in our community greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and that moves to 100% by 2050. and we would become a 100% renewable energy community by 2050. And also underlying all of that is the need and importance to address the changing climate that is underway currently. So the plan was adopted. It was very much evidence-based and built upon a lot of modelling and engagement. It contains 131 actions that I know sounds quite overwhelming and is generally more than most climate plans that are out there. But we felt it very important that we put in very specific, measurable actions and felt that they were necessary for us to address the full realm of sustainability when it comes to our community. So we not only wanted to address climate change and the usual greenhouse gas emission reductions from the energy used within our boundaries, but we also wanted to address the full spectrum of sustainability and what we call our consumption-based emission inventory. So Cora's going to speak a little bit later about that in more detail, but it just meant that we included things in our climate plan that were not just around the energy used in transportation and buildings and infrastructure and the waste that we generate, but also food and materials. We looked at ecosystems, particularly as it relates to carbon sinks, but also as the potential for addressing climate adaptation. Community well-being is in there as well. And obviously there's that section about leading by example, so leadership in our district operations.
Oh, fantastic. That ties it all together, doesn't it? That leadership component. So absolutely critical. Yeah. What do you feel makes the plan successful?
Well, firstly, and very much important in today's global society, it's very evidence-based. So we did hire consultants to do some energy modelling work for us. And I know that there are a variety of tools out there within the province at the moment if different municipalities don't have the resources to undertake that work specifically for them as a municipality. But we did feel it was very important, back in 2018 when we began this modelling work, to really understand what actions were actually going to get us to our 2030 and our 2050 targets. And so they modeled an emissions pathway for us. We brainstormed with our local community and looking at best practice and research what the actions were likely to be or what they could be in these theme areas. And then they were modeled in terms of their greenhouse gas emission reduction potential. And we amended the strength of those actions and the number of those actions based upon what that modeling showed. But we also recognized that it was really critical that we built this together with our community, because we alone as the district of Saanich, we have a role to play in climate change, but we also know that we need our provincial government and we need our federal government. We need our community, we need our businesses and organizations and our public members to be involved and not just recognize that this is an important piece of work, but also that they're involved in the actions to change it and to move forwards and reach those targets. So we actually asked our consultants to take that quite intricate, detailed modeling tool that they had and make a very simplistic engagement tool that could be used from our elected officials to a member of our community that may not have much knowledge around climate change. And it was extremely helpful in engaging the public and our stakeholders around the topics of climate change, and also helping them understand that there's no one silver bullet here. You can't just switch to electric vehicles and achieve those targets. That actually, by looking at the dials that we had on this engagement tool, there was a real light bulb moment and realization that, wow, you need to do action in all of these areas. And it can't just be incentives. We have to have strict and firm policies in place, and we have to speak to legislation, as well as those incentives and community programs and awareness raising. So I think that was very helpful. And finally, one of the other key pieces that helped with the success of the plan was the partnerships that we built. I mentioned that it incorporates climate adaptation, and we couldn't have embedded that within the plan without the great partnership we had with ICLA and their Together for Climate project. So they helped us in doing our climate risk assessment work and embedding adaptation within the climate plan actions. And then the other partnership being with Bioregional and One Earth on the One Planet Saanich project that Cora will speak about a little bit later.
Fantastic. We're actually going to be hearing from Cora later about One Planet's Saanich. But there was a couple of things that I loved that you said, and that was in particular, no thing works, but everything works when you work it, right? That it has to be an integrative approach. And it clearly sounds like as well, it wasn't just about changing people's behaviors, but also how they thought around the importance of this. So using those key engagement tools that help people understand that we're all in this together, and that our behavior and our ways of thinking impact one another. So that's beautiful and important to take into consideration. So tell us a little bit about some of the actions in the plan that Saanich has been implementing.
Yes, so the plan was approved January last year. We had 71 actions outlined for at least starting in 2020. And obviously COVID hit, so it impacted us a little in terms of implementing those actions. We were able to bring some others from later years forward to address those that we weren't able to start this year. But some of the highlights have been, we wanted to go, start with a bang. The intent was to have a considerable amount of engagement last year that very much we had to adapt to what that looked like. But one of those pieces that helped was we started with a residents' climate action guidebook. So you've got this big climate plan, it's over 100 pages. Your general public are not going to read that. So what's helpful for them to understand what they can do in their lives? And so this guidebook is a very, very simple tool for the public to be able to use or at home if they're chatting with their kids who may be looking at sustainability in school. We recognize that there are some bubbles out there, so coffee conversations within your bubble. And the tool is, it takes you to our carbon calculator so that you can have a look at what your current carbon footprint is as an individual and for your household. And then it helps you with identifying some of those actions that you can take, hopefully with support from your municipality and other orders of government and other organizations locally. So those actions that you can take to be able to reduce your carbon footprint. And so that was one of the key first pieces that we put out there as a bit of a companion guide to the climate plan. And then in terms of there's been a suite of work that we've done at the staff level this year, again, engaging with stakeholders and collaborating with lots of different organizations. We had a big focus on electric mobility. It's going to account for about 19% of our community-wide greenhouse gas reduction. So we developed and council adopted an electric mobility strategy. We secured federal grant funding to add an additional 20 new level 2 electric vehicle charging stations to our community. We approved bylaws requiring electric vehicle infrastructure requirements in new buildings. That helps to address some of the issues around people wanting to buy an electric vehicle, but they may live in a strata and they can't access charging to be able to do that. In terms of buildings, we adopted the next step of the BC Energy Step Code. We provide top-up funding to the provincial rebates, and we work collaboratively with our regional partners and our local municipalities to establish Bring It Home for Climate regional campaign, which basically builds on those rebates that are out there currently and supports the community in being able to upgrade their homes and switch to a sustainable or renewable form of energy. In terms of adaptation, we completed a flood, inundation and sea level rise mapping report with the region led that. We were one of those players in one of the municipalities at the table, and that's going to help us massively when it comes to things like flood construction levels to address future sea level rise and flooding associated with that. So a suite of actions, lots of others underway, many of them very dependent upon collaboration with other municipal partners, provincial government, federal government, and local organisations.
Thank you, Rebecca, for telling us about all of the action items that are in that plan. One of the things that I'm curious about is what's the plan for tracking progress? And of course, some of these, tracking progress is always a challenge, right? Ensuring that you're actually achieving those outcomes that you intended. So what's the plan for tracking progress?
Yeah, Christina, the tracking, it's pretty crucial. We did put in a monitoring and reporting section within the climate plan, and council were very keen and stressed this when they approved the plan, that they wanted to see an annual report card back. And we're just drafting that at the moment and due to take that to council next month. So we recognise that you have these actions in the climate plan. You have made the assumption, you've done modelling, you've done best practice research, you've got some assumption in there that they are going to achieve these targets. But being able to track the outcomes from those actions and see if they are in reality achieving those targets is pretty important. So it gives us the opportunity to be able to course correct, accelerate some actions that may need to move forwards because we're not reaching those targets quick enough. And so yes, it's a really important part of our climate plan implementation. I mentioned our first report card's about to be presented to council. We did do an updated community-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Actually the CRD, our regional district, undertook that for us and the other municipalities for 2018. And we have seen some progress, which is fantastic news. We've seen about a 14% decrease in our community-wide emissions since 2007. But we have to temper that to some degree with an understanding that we have some major restrictions around data that we're trying to address. We're working with the province to try and address those, but it does restrict the accuracy of the results that come back from our inventory. And also, we want to be able to track progress on some actions where there's just not the data currently, and it's really valuable for us to access that. So we're working on that at the moment with a variety of partners. But we have a plan in place to be able to monitor and report.
Awesome, that's fantastic. And also, it's so important to remind ourselves as well that some of that tracking will occur over time and hopefully be intergenerational, right? You have to be in for the long term. It's not just about quick wins. I mean, that's fantastic that you're achieving that already, and but it's also about seeing the long game and being in it for the long game. And that comes back to the question, what kind of ancestor do we want to be, right? So that's so important. So, I mean, we're all, as we record this, we're still in the midst of a global pandemic. And this plan was approved by council in January 2020, prior to COVID-19 impacting all of our lives. Tell us about some of the challenges that the plan faced as a result of things shifting rather rapidly with COVID-19.
Absolutely. Yes, it was approved just before COVID officially hit us, and council actually approved quite a considerable budget increase to support implementing the plan. And that was in principle. They were just about to go into their budget deliberation sessions, and obviously COVID hit, and there was a huge amount of uncertainty, particularly as it related to the financial impact of this global pandemic. So understandably so, council had to make the decision that they were going to delay and hold off on putting those budget extensions and that increased budget in place to accelerate the implementation of the climate plan. And that did mean that we had to look at some of those actions that were due to be implemented last year. And some of them did fall back behind schedule. And so we tried to adapt to that situation. There were some actions from future years that didn't require budget or required very limited budget. And we were able to bring some of those forward to implement in 2020. There's a lot of provincial and federal funding out there. We constantly look for grant applications or opportunities to collaborate with different partners so that we're sharing resources. So we just accelerated that approach. And obviously there's co-benefits from that collaboration as well. Other things that we really struggled with initially through COVID, but the world has adapted and technology supported us on that front, is definitely the amount of engagement that we usually do, whether it's about climate change generally, or whether it's about the individual types of programs or actions we're putting in on the ground. And so we had this great plan for great in-person engagement, all the festivals we would be at and how we would be presenting and going out and workshopping with different groups and organizations, and it had to, as you know, had to move online and do this very differently, and I think the whole world has adapted to that. The other things have been delays to technology. Unfortunately, we were on the brink of seeing electric trucks and more heavy duty and medium duty electrified vehicles coming on the market, and we know that COVID's impacted and delayed that. So we're having to wait very patiently and look at how we can reduce our emissions in the meantime. There are a variety of other things that we've tried to address this year, but I think definitely working with partners and looking at different solutions in our communities is just definitely jumped on board and being able to adapt to the situation. I think what COVID has shown us, though, we obviously declared that climate emergency back in 2019, and a lot of other municipalities have declared a climate emergency as well, and other global governments. And you come into a global pandemic, and there's been some great glimmers of hope there when you think how the global society has come together around, for instance, developing vaccinations in such a short time frame, and when there's the will and the investment and the recognition of what an emergency really means and a crisis really means, and when people come together to address that, it's really great to see what amazing change can happen in such a short space of time. And so it makes me very hopeful for the next few years that we do likewise for the climate emergency.
Yes, absolutely. I think conversations have been elevated around sustainability like never before. And that's been one of the huge benefits of this. And the leadership component that you spoke about is so important, having that commitment from council, financially modeling it from the leadership perspective. That's absolutely critical. So what do we need from our elected officials to meet those targets, to continue making sure that ball moves forward?
I have to say I'm very lucky. I've worked in sustainability over the last 15 plus years in different municipalities in different countries. And I feel very fortunate to be at the District of Saanich at the moment. We do have great leadership when it comes to climate change. I'm not just saying that because we've got Councillor Taylor on the panel about to speak a little bit later. But I think, leadership from your elected officials, firstly, showing interest and knowledge and understanding of climate change. And I'm hopeful that knowledge and understanding is quite high across the province. But also the trust in staff to go away and explore best practice and to do the analysis and present options to council that do address those targets that we've put in place and adopted. Demonstration of leadership, not only by including climate action as one of your key strategic plan actions, so it's front and center in our council strategic plan, but also through the decisions that are made, and not when it comes to just the sustainability team coming and presenting to council, but in every decision that is made at council. So very much connecting the dots between perhaps a parks presentation or a budget decision that's related to road infrastructure or bike lane infrastructure, tying it back to the GHG reduction and the climate impacts associated with that, and the sustainable, so the social impacts that are associated with that as well. And we try hard to be able to present that information to council and provide supporting tools at the staff level. But being able to do that at the council level is extremely critical for us to be able to move forwards on climate action. And we have a council that walks the talk as well. So we've got councillors that drive EVs, that bike for their commute and bike for their trips, that ride transit, that have upgraded their homes, that have heat pumps. So not only are they walking the talk and showing leadership through their own actions, but they're also experiencing what individuals need to experience or will experience, and the barriers some of them may face when it comes to being able to adopt these practices. Like there's nothing like biking your kids to work in the rain, or to understand the value of end of trip facilities in the workplace, or the value of a AAA dedicated bike lane for the safety and encouragement to get people out of the car and into active transportation. And so they have that knowledge and that understanding because they're also walking the talk and they've experienced that firsthand, and that's really helpful to us. And then I'd say finally, it's making bold decisions. So it's not just improving the incentive programs, but it's making the bold decisions around the legislation and the policy that needs to complement those incentive programs to actually get action and change and reaching those targets on the ground. So I'm very fortunate, and those are critical elements that I think are important to be able to support staff in the community in addressing climate action.
Excellent. Thank you, Rebecca. When we get into talking about leadership attributes, I hope we get to talk about the fact that, like you said, that bold, brave leadership is absolutely necessary. And sometimes that means taking a bullet for the future, right? And making decisions, again, on behalf of future generations. That's so important. And I love the fact that you talked about that you have a council that's not only talking the talk, but walking the walk, because I certainly know as an elected official, your community is watching you. How you conduct yourself and model behavior is so important. They are watching you. And so the ability to make those brave decisions and to hold them then for the community is so critical. And engaging the community in this conversation is absolutely critical. And so one of the aspects of the plan has been that the fact that the district has been working with One Planet Saanich for their community engagement efforts. And so we have Cora here with us today. And I'm wondering, Cora, could you explain to us how One Planet Saanich is contributing to Saanich's climate action efforts?
Absolutely, Christina. So thank you for having me here, joining you today. So yes, One Planet Saanich is a community engagement effort aimed at supporting all the local organizations within Saanich, and that includes businesses, nonprofit groups, and schools to take action on sustainability challenges, including climate change. And this initiative is part of a global One Planet Cities program, which is led by Bioregional UK. So this provides some global reach, helping us learn from peers around the world and also sharing our successes with them. So all about peer learning. Through One Planet Saanich, we're helping these organizations figure out what are the best ways they can contribute to reducing community-wide carbon and ecological footprints. So we have these metrics for Saanich based on some work I've been doing I also work with the BC Institute for Technology Centre for Ecocities. And we worked with Rebecca a few years ago to do these inventories, the consumption-based greenhouse gas emission inventory that Rebecca mentioned, and an ecological footprint. So this looks at the consumption emissions associated with the community communities. So alongside these key metrics, we use the One Planet Living Principles as a guiding framework. This makes sure that we are considering and acting on sustainability challenges holistically. So the metrics and the principles help us inform the actions that our participating organizations are taking, and this contributes to achieving Saanich's climate plan goals.
So tell us a little bit more about those principles and how they're being used in Saanich.
Yeah. So the principles, there are 10 simple principles that cover all aspects of social, environmental, and economic sustainability, ranging from promoting health and happiness, ensuring equity, protecting and restoring nature, achieving zero waste, and zero carbon lifestyles. So these principles serve essentially as a lens for evaluating actions at all levels. So they were used within Saanich's climate plan to help select actions that will contribute to broader sustainability while also looking at climate action. So it's essential to focus on these key metrics, our greenhouse gas emissions and ecological footprint, but we also need to do it in ways that don't compromise other essential elements of sustainability. So that's where the principles come in.
So tell us about some of the other organizations in the community that are also involved and what they're doing to support One Planet Saanich.
Yeah. So we have, right now we have 18 organizations in the One Planet Saanich community. So it's a number of secondary schools, college, one of the largest malls in Saanich, a church, faith group, and other nonprofit and businesses as well. So they're all contributing towards the climate targets and creating their own One Planet Action Plan. So many of them have created their own One Planet Action Plan, which include climate actions. All of the community organizations we have were engaged in contributing to building Saanich's climate plan as well. So that was through consultation they were heavily engaged in. And they've undertaken some really great actions that are contributing significantly. So our schools, many of them are building food gardens. One standout example of that is Reynolds Secondary School, which has had a food garden for a number of years now, but they've stepped it up one step further by it's become now a market garden in partnership with Topsoil Urban Agriculture. So this is a local organization which has helped them turn this into a market garden, selling to the community, and also supplies their salad bar program in their school. The faith group we have on board created an Eco Games program. So they launched this Eco Games, which is a friendly competition amongst neighborhoods. They had 12 neighborhoods competing against each other to reduce their carbon and ecological footprints. Another example, B-Spot Neighborhoods, a local developer that broke ground on a new passive house development, and this used the One Planet Living principles as a guiding framework. Some of the other things we'll be working on coming up are a lighter footprint app that we'll be launching, developed by BCIT and partners, which will help individuals take action on their carbon and ecological footprint.
Cora, you've been working closely with stakeholders in Saanich, and this is a conference for elected officials. What do you want the elected officials listening in on this conversation, based on your conversations with stakeholders? What do you want them to hear? Things that they can do in their own local governments?
We've had great input and engagement from the council, mayor and council within the One Planet Saanich program, and also enabling staff at Saanich to participate in this community initiative, community-led initiative. So having access to staff amongst the community organization has been really important. And just the general support that the municipality has provided to it. We heard from a lot of the organizations that there was a lack of this collaboration network, and access to the knowledge that they needed. most of them didn't know where to start, like what was needed to take action in a meaningful way on climate and sustainability. So we provided them the information on what are these key metrics that they need to take action on, and then also help them access the information in terms of what are the municipal programs available, regional government programs that are available, and connected them with the holders of that information. So we did that. We provided access to one-on-one mentorship. We did some speed networking programs, which helped facilitate access to that information. Supporting this collaboration network, I think, is really critical. Peer learning, again, access to those other knowledge holders. So anything the municipality can do to continue to support that and enable those collaboration and connections, I think is really critical. And did want to say, I guess, re-articulate what Rebecca was saying about the bold leadership too. That's really essential right now. This is, where we need to focus our efforts on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the stakeholders in your community has been the education system. And thank you so much, Cora. Next up, I want to call on Lauren. Lauren's a student at Reynolds Secondary School, which has been one of the organizations that is participating in the One Planet Saanich project. And I'm wondering, Lauren, if you can tell me a little bit about the climate work that's going on in your school.
Hi. So Reynolds has done a lot in the past few years to kind of get more healthy food, less wasteful food into our students' mouths. So I am a manager. Since last year, I've been a manager for our salad bar program. Part of that is harvesting foods from our microgarden and using that to feed our school. So in past years, it was a thing where we'd use the week to prepare and then serve near the end of the week. But because of COVID, it's kind of been stunted a bit. So as of now, we've kind of changed it into a community market thing. So instead of just letting our microgreens go to waste, we've been selling them back to our community. And along with that, we've also been getting outside materials. So we've received eggs and things we typically wouldn't have, and selling them back to our teachers and our school community. We've also had teachers bring in their own kind of soaps and hot sauces, weird stuff you'd never think that teachers would make. So that was always interesting when we found out one of our kind of more strict teachers were selling hot sauces on the side. Other than that, our leadership program does a lot throughout the years. Well, I know last year what we did was we raised money for life cycles, which is what we do our micro garden thing with. And we've also had gardening clubs, which kind of educate students and make them want to come back and want to learn about the environment. So Reynolds has been doing a lot, and it's kind of hard to keep track of because when there's 1,300 students doing different things, it's a bit difficult. As for the things that need to change, if you have seen Reynolds, you know that there is a Tim Hortons right next to it. So teenagers being teenagers, of course, are going to go over at lunch if they don't want to bring in lunch or they don't want their parents to make them lunch. They're going to go over to Tim Hortons and buy food or whatever and eat it and then throw that waste on the ground. So a big thing that we've been looking at, like the more environmental side of Reynolds, is kind of reducing that plastic usage. Because we do have recycling bins and composting bins, but that's kind of like moot at a point because people either will not recycle, but if they do, if that recycling is tainted, it just gets thrown out. And it's unsustainable for us to expect, students like me who are, almost going out into the world and are very, very busy with school and work and anything else going on in their lives, that they cannot be there every night sorting through recycling, cleaning recycling like other high schools do. And it would just be easier to say, well, instead of having this in the first place, we have to reduce that usage. Another thing is connections between other schools. I only know what happens in Reynolds, and it's improper to make speculations about other youth communities when I don't know what's happening. So a lot of times we're told, oh, well, you probably have friends in Oak Bay or other high schools in the area. But when those connections aren't made, we don't know what's going on. And there is unity in community. So we cannot be forced to say, yeah, we're doing this within our community when we can't be doing it within our community.
Those are some very important messages, right? And I'm going to grab on that. There's unity within community. That's an incredibly powerful message. I want to ask you one thing, and that is, you have an audience here of elected officials from throughout the province. Just in one or two sentences, what is the most important message that you want to leave for them?
Earlier today, someone said that they would like to be a good ancestor. I think it was you, Christina. I would like that to just be taken into account right now. Earlier this year when I went to, last year, when I went to a Saanich One Planet meeting, there was a lot of focus on youth voices, which I think are very important. But the issue is when youth voices are constantly being told, you're going to make the world different. The world is already here. So I think the pressure should really be taken off the people who are going into the world right now. It needs to be the people who have already experienced the world, who've already had these massive ideas and beliefs and everything, that they should be the ones looking at what they can do. And they should be the ones trying their best and educating those who don't know. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That's such an important message. Make decisions. When you're making decisions at the council and board table, make them for future generations, right? Don't just put the burden on the youth. Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to welcome Emma Jane and Ned, who have been waiting patiently by. They've been listening to the conversation, and Ned is an elected official, but I'm going to turn it over to Emma Jane first to start out. What about that question that I posed earlier? What are some of the most important conversations around sustainability and climate change that we need to have that maybe aren't being had? I'm going to start with you, Emma Jane.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say a shout out to Lauren about that point about young people, because I definitely have to say that a lot to people about how young people are the future, but we also need to make sure that generations now are contributing. But I think in terms of your question, there's two things that stand out to me. The first is having an intersectional approach to our climate action. And I think that starts with recognizing that the environmental movement has contributed to oppression. And I know that that's a really hard thing for us to recognize, but it is essential for us to be able to do the work that we're doing. We have to recognize how we have contributed to systemic racism and systemic oppression of marginalized communities. And so having that intersectional lens is really important. And then the second thing is recognizing like sustainability in terms of our health. I think a lot right now, especially with COVID-19, we're talking a lot about health, and it's a huge issue right now. But I think that starts with looking at the ways we produce that are unsustainable, and even just the sheer amount of time that people have to spend producing. We put so much value on producing rather than our health. And I think we should really be looking at that more, especially in the light of COVID-19.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Emma Jane. Ned, what about yourself? You're a first-term elected official, and Saanich is leading the way in many ways. From your perspective, speaking to your peers around the province, what are those conversations that need to be elevated?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of specific examples that I could draw to particularly, but I think it's actually those conversations around climate change generally that need to be elevated right now. You know, I think throughout 2020, we have obviously been in the midst of a pandemic, but climate change hasn't stopped for a pandemic. It hasn't taken a break. Right. So I think that we need to be really just elevating those conversations around climate change and sustainability, whether it's waste, whether it's food, whether it's transportation, whether it's energy. All of those conversations I think need elevating right now, because unfortunately I think that although rightly so, we've been addressing the pandemic. We've also, I think, perhaps forgotten a little bit about how much these environmental issues are important. Again, climate change hasn't stopped for a pandemic. So those are the conversations that we need to be elevating right now, I think. And I also just, while I've got the floor, just want to say thank you to everybody who's spoken before me. I don't know if there's much more that I can honestly add to this conversation, because so many important points have been made, but just thank you to all of you for all the work that you're doing right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Ned. I'm going to put you on the spot one more time here, though. One of the things that I think is really critical is not only elevating the conversations, but actually pulling the trigger and taking action, real action, right? And so what I'm curious about from your perspective, what are some of those leadership attributes that are necessary in elected officials to close that knowing doing gap, so that we're taking action on here's what we know and how do we make sure that we're actually acting on what we know?
Absolutely. I think, as an elected official, you have to be able to have an open mind and to take in all of the input and all of the information on a matter before making a decision. But then when you reach that point, when you've been able to take in all the information, take in all of the input, you have to reach a point where you're able to make a decision and then execute that decision and deliver on that decision. And I think we've reached a point on climate change, I think actually decades ago, where the evidence has been extraordinarily clear that the issue is real. Climate change is caused by humans. It's getting worse. We're not doing enough currently. And so I think right now what we have to do is we have to recognize that we've reached that decision point. In fact, we're past it. We have to be able to understand that climate change is real, that it's getting worse, and that we're not doing enough. And now we need to deliver on those actions that we know are necessary. We have the evidence, we know what we have to do, and now it's just a matter of doing it. And I think, having the political will to, I guess, pull the trigger is really necessary. And so I think, for myself as an elected official, I'm trying to call on all of my colleagues, both at local government and at the provincial and federal level, to be doing better. But also as citizens, we need to be calling on our elected officials and on each other as human beings, as citizens of this planet, to be doing more. We all have a role to play, and we all need to play our role in order to succeed in this regard.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ned. This is one of the most important conversations of our time, and the conversation isn't over. We have an opportunity to take action and to be a good ancestor. And so what I want to, as we close, I just want to go around the panel here, and I want you to share one or two words or a sentence that you would like to leave our audience with. So just giving that a moment's thought. And maybe I'll turn it over to Cora if you want to start us off. What's that important message that you'd like to leave?
Right. Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of add to what was already said in terms of these tough questions that I think we're not having. And really, I think the key piece is that change makes us uncomfortable. We shy away from these difficult questions because it gets us uncomfortable. People, by our nature, don't like change. And I think we often operate at a philosophy of engaging people where they're at, and there's no time for that right now. We need this bold, ambitious change, and having leaders out there that are courageous to make those things happen, which, as Christina, as you mentioned, you might take a hit for it if you take out that one step, but that's what we need right now. And I think many of our communities, people are now ready for that. This is kind of this pivotal time. And we're seeing through COVID that we can make these massive changes. We need a COVID level type of response for climate change. And it's not just about climate change. We have massive other issues that are happening: biodiversity loss, resource depletion, inequity. All of these things are completely interconnected, and people are now seeing this and realizing. So we need things like, we need a climate emergency officer, like we have this public health officer, which then can empower the elected officials to take those actions that are needed. So working with senior level government to make these changes as well that we need. And I think that was one great way of doing it, having a climate emergency officer. So we also need, in this transformative change that we need massive lifestyle changes. And again, that's uncomfortable for all of us. By our nature, we're uncomfortable with change. But if I think the leadership opportunity for elected official is really essential, as we've talked about here today, making sure that our leaders are demonstrating what we can do. I think we can also shift the way we're presenting things. Sustainable lifestyles are healthier and happier for all of us. So instead of talking about reducing, preventing, limiting, and fighting, we should be talking about the co-benefits of sustainable living, and demonstrating that all of these things can make us healthier, happier, having more time with our family, less time focused on, chasing the dollar, and more time on having real experiences that will make us all happier.
Awesome. Thank you, Cora. And I think that that's so important, that we hold the polarity of the fact that we're in a crisis, and we can do it from an energy of love. Right? It's a both and. It has to be love for the future, love for future generations, and be willing to hold that discomfort and stay in the room when the conversation gets uncomfortable. That's an important message that I hope is left behind. All right, Emma Jane.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me is that we must be thinking and acting on how to heal the world. And I think that really stems from an importance placed on integrity.
Thank you. Ned?
Well, I guess it's hard to sort of shrink it down into just 3 words, but just very briefly, I think, because I know that a lot of elected officials are watching. Sometimes as an elected official myself, I recognize that there's an issue that's very urgent, but I sometimes I'm not exactly sure what to do about that issue. Sometimes the action that's necessary isn't all that clear. So I would encourage all those elected officials that are watching, don't be afraid to learn, never stop learning, and learn from other municipalities. You can say, look, Saanich is doing X, Y, and Z. Could we consider doing that in our own municipality? And that would be my advice for all of the elected officials watching.
Excellent. Thank you, Ned. What about yourself, Rebecca?
Hard to sum it down into 3 words. I think Gandhi's "Be the Change" is a really nice one, especially with elected officials on the line. But I also I really value some of the comments from Lauren and Emma Jane. And I think Greta Thunberg, when in her Davos speech in 2019, thinking about the crisis situation, where she says basically she doesn't really want our hope. What she wants is for us to recognize that she wants us to act like the house is on fire, because it really is. This is a crisis situation, and we really need to make those bold decisions to be able to address it. And we're trained. We have some amazing training to be able to deal with crisis situations, so we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lauren, the last word.
Like, this is our future. This is our kids' future. This is our grandchildren's future. Something needs to change, or else it's not going to be anyone's future. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so if you are watching this, before we go into the question period, I want you to write down, be a good ancestor. That's what I want to leave you with today. Thank you so much. Well, hello, everyone. So happy to be back. We had so much fun on that conversation. It was very rich and interesting, and I'm so grateful to all of the panelists that participated. Ned and Lauren and Emma Jane are not able to be with us today for our follow-up conversation, but I do have Rebecca and Cora with us. So we're going to dig into some questions, but I really hope that you got some nuggets and some inspiration from that conversation. So thank you to all the panelists. So I'm going to start with Cora. Cora, we've got one question here, and you mentioned consumption-based emissions inventories and the ecological footprint as new types of metrics that local governments can use. Can you give us more detail on the value of these types of metrics and explain how they are different from traditional greenhouse gas emissions and inventories?
Absolutely, Christina. So I think this is a really important development in greenhouse gas emission inventories, the consumption-based approach, as well as looking at the ecological footprint as well. So typically communities and other levels of government have been looking at greenhouse gas emissions through this local inventory approach, so territorial or sectoral it's called. So that looks at the emissions that arise from the energy we're using locally, and also the impact of handling our waste. But this new form, the consumption-based approach, looks at the energy emissions that went into producing all of the things that we're using in our daily lives, so no matter where they're produced. So in Saanich and across North America, we live in consumer societies. So when you start looking at the consumption-based impacts, our estimates of our greenhouse gas emissions essentially doubles. So this is because we're importing the vast majority of these things that we're using in our daily lives, consumable goods and food. So we're like, it's like we're offshoring these emissions to other locations, which isn't very equitable. So conversely, other cities around the world that are producing all these things, their emission inventories locally would be going up higher. They're producing all of our stuff for us. It's also really important to note that 50% of the emissions, the consumption-based emissions around the world, can be attributed to 10% of the top 10% of income earners around the world. So that shows another equity challenge there as well. So municipalities and states that have been looking at, or regional governments that have been looking at consumption-based emissions, are starting to see their territorial emissions might be going down, but their consumption-based emissions are going up. So if we don't tackle those consumption-based emissions, we'll never get to our global targets. And then the ecological footprint goes one step further, and this is a really important metric as well. So we know climate change is just one of our sustainability challenges that we're bumping up against a number of planetary boundaries. We're hitting resource constraints too. So that's where the ecological footprint helps. It looks at translating the resource consumption impacts into a land-based metric, so we can show how much resources we're consuming within a community. Right now in Saanich and other communities across Canada, we're consuming way more than our planet can sustain. So for example, in Saanich, we're consuming the equivalent of 4 planets worth of resources. So if everyone on the planet consumed like us, we'd need 4 planets to sustain us. So I think this is a new leadership opportunity. So leading communities are really starting to dig into these metrics, and I'd encourage everybody to look into them further.
Wow, that's sobering. That's really sobering information for all of us to take to heart. Not only as elected officials, but also personally in our personal lives as well. Rebecca, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Just that it's been a really valuable resource for us when we were building the climate plan, so that it meant that we had a different conversation and a more inclusive conversation with some members of our community. I think I mentioned before about the fact that for instance, when we were out in the schools and with youth, if they don't have the control over the decisions made in their home or their household, and they currently don't have a driver's license, so they're usually using a sustainable form of transportation if they're not in their parents' vehicle, then they they want to have the conversations about consumptions. And for them, textiles is huge, the clothing industry, and food. And obviously we heard some really great examples before about what Reynolds is doing in terms of local food production and social community aspects from that role.
Awesome, thank you. So there's certainly a lot of questions around resources. And, the fact that small municipalities are already stretched beyond measure, right? So one of the questions here is, what can small municipalities do with limited staff capacity? I know I have some thoughts around that, but I'm curious as to what your thoughts are. Rebecca, I'll start with you.
I really appreciate that. Regardless of the size of municipality, I think a lot of us are feeling very, very stretched, particularly after 2020 and what we're going through at the moment. I would say sharing resources. There are a huge amount of resources out there, and I know sometimes it's hard to even have the time to be able to take that first step and make the phone call or try and collaborate with a local, maybe a regional partner or another municipality. But to give an example of what we've been doing, we're in the capital region, and we work very closely as one of the bigger municipalities in that region with the Capital Regional District. And they've been a great resource for us. I don't know if others are in the same situation where they may have a higher body or a regional body they could go to ask for some assistance or some help on this front. But they effectively bring together all the municipalities and share the knowledge and work that's underway. So as the District of Saanich, we did a lot of research into step code, but we actually paired off quite a lot of that analysis with the CRD and with the City of Victoria, and we had some other municipalities on board, and then shared the information and the work that was done with those other municipalities, invited them to come to the workshops and be at the table or put their logo on and participate in that engagement process without necessarily having to have the resources to put into the development of the project, but being able to glean from the information that was being pulled together. That's at the regional level. That's very much being done on some climate actions at the provincial level. So BC Hydro have the Community Energy Manager Forum, but that has a couple of peer networks that municipalities can join onto, one of them on the step code, one of them on EV adoption. And again, they do a lot of the analysis, a lot of the work. They get grants to fund some of this work. They help develop toolkits or documents or things that would be supportive for other municipalities to be able to perhaps take on the step code or undertake EV legislation without necessarily having the resources to do all of that work in the background. And then finally, there are toolkits out there that the Community Energy Association released last year, the Climate Action Planner tool that's online that can be looked up. And there are other toolkits out there as well. So if there's some resource to be able to access that information, it's a great starting point. You don't have to create your whole large greenhouse gas emission model and go through a two-year process to create a detailed plan. There's a lot of information there.
Yeah, good point. There are a lot of resources and opportunities to access those resources. So, Cora, do you have anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I think I would say be creative with what you have as well. I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of shift things around within your current mandates. And I think that's a part of the change we need to see. We need to see some big shifts in the way things are done. And a lot of that is for the more senior level of government, like shifting subsidies to fossil fuels and things like that to finance a lot of these things we need. But there's some of that is relevant at the local government level too. So shifting the way we're doing things. There's some money there that could be redirected at a simple level. So I think also, well, watch our space. We've at the BCIT Centre for Ecocities, where I work, as well as One Earth, we're here to help support cities in this work. And we worked with Saanich and 10 other communities on the pilot project we just did. We're hoping to be able to expand that and work with more communities. We're currently seeking funding. So we're trying to help support the municipalities in any way we can as well. So you can always reach out to us. I can share our website. It might come out later too. So you can get in touch and we can help, hopefully.
Awesome. That's great. The other thing that I wanted to add, and just to kind of add on to what Cora was talking about as well, is use your existing your policies and your procedures and your bylaws, and use the tools that you actually have. Don Lidstone was talking earlier about business recovery and ensuring that you're updating your existing policies. Make sure that they also have a sustainable lens, so that all of your decisions are made through a lens of sustainability. And I would add to that you want to include that onto your staff reports. Make sure that every staff report has that every decision is filtered through the philosophical lens of sustainability, and put those future generations in your imagination in a council meeting and in a board meeting, and make sure that they are the people that you're thinking about as you're making those decisions. So some very tangible and tactile recommendations, but also some very just some more ethereal way of doing business, and making sure that that's the lens your decisions are made through. So that's excellent. There's a couple other questions here, and I'm not sure who would like to answer it. Curious where land use and the focus on density landed on the priority list in the plan. So Rebecca, should I punt that to you?
Really, in reality, it's a key top priority. It's, in terms of the discussions we had about the plan, transportation's our biggest emitter at 60% almost of our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. And it's throwing money away to invest in a transit system or an active transportation network if you're going to continually grow outwards and in an unsustainable way. So it was very much a theme throughout the development of our plan. We made a purposeful decision when we were hiring our consultant that we did modeling that was based on land use as well. So we had a lot of exercises and workshops that were map-based and discussed, transit-oriented development and land use decisions. But I would say, actually, in reading the plan now and looking at it and the specific actions that we have, I think it's an area that could potentially be strengthened. And a lot of it was almost to some degree, these are discussions that happen at our regional level, and they go beyond our Saanich municipal boundaries. So we have our own OCP. It's very focused on compact, complete communities and putting density in nodes and corridors that's transit-oriented, development supportive, that supports our active transportation network. But we've just been working with our regional district on future transportation priorities, and the top one for us is around those regional discussions around how we grow and grow sustainably and how it speaks to climate action.
Awesome, thank you. No, that's fantastic. Do you want to add anything, Cora?
No, that's okay. I think that was Rebecca covered that one.
I think so too. So there was another question here, and it was probably directed to Ned, right? Around being a young counselor. And I'm sure he would love to answer those questions. Unfortunately, he's not here today. But But one of the questions that came up that we mentioned during the discussion was around leadership attributes. What are those necessary leadership attributes that need to be embodied in elected officials? And we've heard a lot of conversation about how difficult it is to sometimes be vilified by the public for some of those bold and brave and challenging decisions that you have to make. And like you talked about, Cora, the messiness of change and the uncertainty surrounding it and the messiness of it. I am curious about what's one micro step that elected officials could take, professionally and personally?
To me?
Yeah, yes. I'll start with you, Cora.
Sorry. Well, first off, I'd like to say thank you to all of the elected officials. Like, it's a huge job and often thankless. And I know you take a lot of flack over some of the things that you have to do. So it takes huge courage to step in this role. You got to have a lot of backbone and thick skin. And so, yeah, a huge thank you. And you see time and time again those people that do step out of the comfort zone and do things to make the change. They take the flack for it, but I'll be here helping to support you. And I think many of us here, we are applauding your work in this area. So yeah, keep up the good fight on it. Micro step, I think, I'm not sure if it's a micro step, but being willing to listen all the time and learn, engage and collaborate. There's always new things to learn. We think we know the answers and we get stuck in this little tunnel. I think it's really important to kind of reevaluate ongoing and listen and collaborate and learn continually.
Awesome, thank you. And Rebecca, do you have a micro step, folks?
It may not be a micro step, but I just wanted to pick up on Cora's previous comment around the co-benefits and recognizing, absolutely, as Cora said, the difficult situation when there are those difficult decisions to be made. And obviously it's made harder by the fact that often you don't get the public come out in droves when it's something they support. You know, you hear the loudest voices when there's something where there's opposition. And certainly that's something that we hope we're encouraging in our community, for them to voice their support for those decisions that are made that are positive and that do support climate action. But going back to those co-benefits, yeah, asking those questions of staff for those staff reports around the option analysis, around showing the value of the co-benefits. And you know, sometimes it's qualitative versus quantitative, and we're doing our utmost to try and make it more quantitative. But it helps broaden the conversation and should hopefully help with the decision making to you know, be much more in alignment with positive action for climate change by presenting that full, you know, the full life cycle considerations and the full co-benefits or the costs associated with a decision that's not recommended to move forwards with.
Awesome, fantastic. Big challenge and big opportunity. So thank you both so much, and thank you, LGLA, for inviting us to be part of this session, and enjoy the rest of your time. Thank you.